Tusind tak. Det er dejligt at være i Skandinavien, især op mod jul. Lige inden jeg slår over på engelsk, vil jeg sige, jeg er også godhedstyran og optimist. Og det vil I høre, mens jeg taler. Now, so that you don't have to bear with my Danish, I will transition to English. Leave no one behind. What a wonderful sentiment. A sentiment, by the way, that we've borrowed from the US military. Just like the log frame. So it's bound to be good, right? As a cross-cutting theme in the global goals, Leave No One Behind is an acknowledgement that a sustainable future for humanity requires us to deal with the enormous disparities in opportunities, wealth, and power that exists in societies and between societies. And as taught by Martin Luther King, power is rarely voluntarily given up by the powerful. This is why achievement of the global goals requires profound societal and organizational transformation everywhere. As I examine this today, I do so very humbly and with a certainty that I will not bring new and profound knowledge to the debate. I certainly don't have all the answers. What I hope to do, however, is to provide an illustrative example of what we're trying to do at Plan International to change our approach to ending social injustice and build future resilience through transforming ourselves and catalyzing transformation wherever we work. As Paula said, business as usual is no option. It's no option at Plan International, at Norad, or anywhere in the development sector. A few words about Plan International. This year, we celebrated our 80th anniversary. We were born during the Spanish Civil War to protect and build resilience for children suffering injustice and violence. This mission is still embedded in our new purpose, which is, together, we advance children's rights and equality for girls. I'll get back to that new purpose in a few minutes. We work in over 80 countries, in thousands of the most poor communities, and we have an annual income of about $1 billion US. About half of that comes from governments like the Norwegian, thank you, and half from over 1 million of private individuals who every day provide funding for our cause. But let's go back to the hardest development challenge of leaving no one behind. One thing that we must remember, communities and population groups are not forgetfully left behind. Public policies, social and political structures, norms and traditions are all about priorities set by either majorities or very powerful minorities, and they're very, very good at systematically continuing to exclude those left behind, because that's in their interest. So at Plan International, we're determined to use our assets to make it harder for those in power to be forgetful. We're determined to make the invisible visible and to give them voice and agency to be heard. Many, many millions of women and girls are currently totally invisible to policymakers. They're simply not counted and their lives are not officially recorded. It's an out-of-sight, out-of-mind issue that desperately needs to change. If data on the barriers of girls facing is missing, even the best intended policymaker may be implementing the wrong solutions. Plus, as I said before, it makes it easier for decision makers and power holders to ignore some issues or groups altogether. Let me use an example. Why, for example, does not a single country in the world measure the fact that millions of girls under 15 become pregnant and give birth every year. It's a very, very uncomfortable truth that girls are either raped, have sex voluntarily, engage in any kind of sexual relationship under 15. But they do. They have children. Children become mothers, and they die giving birth. Nobody measures it. At Plan International, we have a wealth of data ourselves on the 1.4 million sponsored children and their families that are core change champions in our community-based work. It's a data set with 7 trillion data points. Simply put, we know children, and we know girls are the most disadvantaged. But until recently, we used this data mainly to report to our sponsors and our donors, because we're obviously required to report on our results. And sometimes we used it to tweak and improve our programs, because we're a knowledge-based organization. Now, increasingly, we're using it for social change. We're now joining others to accelerate generation sharing and use of gender data to make it harder for power holders to be forgetful. To help plug this gap, we've co-founded Equal Measures 2030, a global civil society and private sector-led partnership to connect data and evidence with advocacy and action. Equal Measures 2030 will help fuel progress towards the global goals through evidence, storytelling, movement building, and social mobilizations. Interestingly, our partners are data experts like Data2X, data analysts like KPMG, women's advocacy organizations like Women Deliver or Femnet, the umbrella network for African feminist NGOs. Our startup funding came from the Gates Foundation, but since I do have the microphone here in front of a government donor, we need more money. Another data and evidence area that we're advancing is an adolescent girls' situation analysis that we're piloting with UNFPA in Laos. And what we're trying to do here is collect holistically information on education, health, safety, protection, economic, social, and political empowerment, and developing a more robust set of indicators that are true to the SDG and looks holistically at the girl child. Better open data and better analysis, better evidence leads to visibility. If we want to ensure that we leave no one behind, data is key. But as we all know, facts are not always enough, particularly in a post-fact world. In Equal Measures 2030 Policymakers Survey, disturbingly we see that policymakers who are willing to estimate the scale of issues such as maternal mortality or women's participation in the workforce in their own country, data that has been available for many, many, many years, are not informed by fact. When asked to estimate the rate of maternal death in their countries, only 2% of policymakers in 5 countries across 3 continents got it right within 20%. In India, policymakers, when asked to estimate the percentage of women who are in the labor force, estimates ranged from 20% to 70%. A lot of them at the high end. The actual figure in India is 27%. So when you're just guessing, and you're guessing wrong, no wonder there is no political momentum behind changing the agenda. So political mobilization, awareness raising, and public demand for change are all required to move the needle for those most left behind. So what more can an organization like ours do to ensure that no one is left behind? Plan International's new global purpose, adopted a year ago, and new 5-year strategy adopted this year in June, tries to answer the question. I won't unpack it all, I promise. but I'll highlight a few illustrative elements together with the challenges that we foresee as we now move into implementation. The biggest change for us is shifting Plan International from being a child rights only organization to being a girls' rights organization, because girls are the children left most behind, and because gender equality can catalyze progress across all the SDGs. We aim to make every program gender transformative, meaning that they directly address power relations, social norms, and discriminatory biases. Now, the implementation challenge, we estimate that today about 25% of our programs are truly gender transformative, and we want to reach 100% in 5 years. We're also changing where we operate, from rural to urban, poor to fragile or off track. We are changing how we operate in different countries to ensure we become more agile and can optimize impact. In countries, we are today seeing deep transformative change happening in communities, but maybe we've become a little bit lazy. When you receive a monthly donation from individuals for many, many years, we can do profound things because it's long-term funding that allows us to stay in community and address needs holistically, build trust, and then address underlying social norms. But this strength comes with a trap. It's very difficult to exit. So over the coming 2-3 years, we will be exiting relatively better off communities and moving our programs to areas where the most vulnerable and marginalized girls and boys are. So far, since we started implementing our strategy in July, we have approved a caseload shift of almost 100,000 sponsored children in 19 countries. In some countries, either due to fragility or where there are high rates of migration, we know that we will have to abandon our sponsorship model altogether. South Sudan is one example. We're also increasing the support we give to countries to fundraise locally. Like others, we want to tap into the growing trend of individual giving in middle-income countries. But at the same time, greater transparency and responsiveness is taking center stage in our work. We deeply believe in truly co-designing program interventions with the girls we serve. A great example of this is our global Safer Cities program, where local girls' clubs identify and design all program interventions. At the global level, we're trying to change our governance model to ensure much greater global diversity in decision-making. With support from the Finnish government, our members in India and Colombia have developed full independence with associated decision rights. Brazil and Indonesia are close to achieving the same status, and 5 other countries are registered as local NGOs. But it's obvious that this is not without challenge. Our old northern members don't particularly like to share power with new members. But it does help that the most effective offices that are delivering both programs and are becoming full members are the ones that have full local ownership and accountability. I want to talk a little bit about a new way of looking at leaving no one behind. When we talk about it, it conjures up an image of swooping in and saving people. But we believe it's not only about leaving no one behind, but building powerful forces for change from the ground up. At Plan International, we've developed a new theory of change that places greater emphasis on the root causes of child rights violation and gender equality. This means working with governments to address policy frameworks and budget allocations, supporting the development of communities through social and economic safety nets, and challenging misogyny and discriminatory attitudes, social norms, and behaviors wherever it exists. Change has to be local, and it has to be driven locally. And as somebody said up here, we cannot wait for an outside force to come and help. The problem, though, in the communities where we work is that girls feel deeply, deeply powerless. They will not wake up just one morning and say, I'm powerful, I'm going to change my community. They need help, and they need support from organizations like ours. But it also means that we, more often than not, need to take a back seat in local and national influencing work, supporting girls to step forward and drive change themselves. What's our role? We can build protective frameworks, build confidence, rights and SDG awareness, and amplify their voice. If we want to meet the challenges of the SDGs, we'll need to see more support for movements that support social change. We know that not only countries have seen that the only countries that have seen real change, for example, in gender-based violence, are those with strong women's movements. The current Me Too movement reinforces that evidence. For us, we see ourselves playing an important role connecting the lived realities of girls and the girls' movement. Let me briefly talk a little bit about how we're trying to embrace innovation. A colleague of mine tells a very good story about a disaster response meeting he attended a few years ago. The usual civil society actors, including ourselves, were attending, as were representatives from a number of private sector companies. The civil society organizations gave thorough, detailed presentations on their approach to the crisis, how many they could reach, what they planned to do, and the shortness of the estimated response time. Those from the private sector stood up, explained what they'd already done. The global hotel chain had opened its doors to those that were left homeless by the disaster. The telecommunications company had built a rudimentary communications network to help those on the ground. My colleague tells of one or two open mouths in the civil society contingent. Through our work, we have deep understanding of poor communities and girls' lived realities. We also have relationships with communities and all the way up to cabinet offices. Yet when I see how mainstream banks are collaborating with fintech companies and how Apple is collaborating with Samsung, its main competitor, to source the screen for their mobile phone, I'm reminded that game-changing innovation rarely happens in isolation. We have acknowledged this and accept that 80 years of experience developing programs to perfection, we believe, gives us many, many blind spots and makes innovation difficult. The innovations of tomorrow are unlikely to be the product of even today's thinking. Large global organizations by nature, and I speak from both UN and global civil society experience, are endemically hierarchical and bureaucratic. The only way to break the mold is to invite disruption inside. And that's why we're increasingly working with partners like Accenture on innovation. They are now embedded physically in Plan International as our innovation accelerator. And we are their priority NGO innovation partner. With partnerships with the private sector, when they work well, it's obviously an opportunity to challenge both ways and to gain new insights. I'd like to just call out that when we work with the private sector, and we do that a lot, we have over 500 private sector partners at Plan, we have to understand one thing. If we look at where the private sector is investing in the SDGs, there's one remarkable goal that is basically untouched, and that's goal number 10 on inequality. Systemic power change is not a priority if you're driven by shareholder profit. Our partnerships therefore need to come with values and a reminder. Long-term commercial growth can only come with sustainability, and ignoring this is at theirs and our peril. So I don't know what the future holds, but I know that we all have to change. Our collective future is by no means clear. We've heard that today. Are we set on a path of true global interdependence with countries strengthening relationships to work better together? Or are these faltering links set to shatter, leaving us in an ever more polarized world where the fences drive citizens apart? I do believe, like others here, and I am an optimist, that the SDGs will help us navigate that. My question to you, will our donors continue to shrink ODA or shrink the flexibility that we have to deliver in difficult conditions? And will you continue to apply ever more conditions to that work? And will we adapt quickly enough to a changing landscape through greater collaboration and cooperation? Or will risk aversion, as usual, and lack of trust drive greater divides and ramp up competition? Without changing our approach to development in some of the ways that I've discussed, there's a real risk that we and you will be the ones left behind. Given the highly different yet plausible futures that we face, ensuring that those of us within civil society remain agile and legitimate is key. At Plan International, we deeply believe in the power and potential of the global goals. That's why they sit at the heart of our new global strategy. We believe that deep-rooted power structures and social norms inside families, schools, in communities, in the workplace need to change in all countries for us to have a chance of leaving no one behind. And for it to happen, we all need to walk the talk and start with ourselves. Thank you very much.